name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RICO 12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015, and for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to RICO 12. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust, and sex, food, and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to www.rico12.com. That's RECO12.com to learn more and to submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. The email list continues to grow each week, and it's we're sending out hundreds each time, and we're grateful for that participation and engagement. RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us work our step 12 in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the costs of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to rico12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal that'll be in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes of the podcast. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This will be meeting number 68. And that's really exciting. We're well over a year now that we've been doing this every Friday, and it continues to grow. It's really fun. Now, one more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light they have been given. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in each of us, the listening audience. Remember that live audience members can ask questions of the speaker by typing those questions into the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Michael S., whose topic is emotional sobriety. Now, here's a little bit about Michael. Michael has been in a variety of 12-step fellowships over the last 8 years. His primary fellowship is AA, even though he is not an alcoholic. He will explain, and I look forward to that explanation. Currently, he is most active in SLAA and CODA. Michael's favorite topic is to talk on is emotional sobriety. He has been practicing as a licensed psychotherapist and life coach for the past 20 years. He and his family live in the southwestern suburbs of Chicago. Michael, we're excited to hear from you. Take it away. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Well, I've heard many of your speakers. I know many of your speakers that you've been on your show before, and I'm really honored to be here. Like a lot of your guests have said before, it's always a privilege. And I know people have said this over and over again, that it is a privilege, because the reality is I'm living on bonus time. I just should not be here. I should be 6 feet under. Like many of your guests, I barely made it. And my journey started, well, let me say, before I start my journey, talked to a good friend of mine, Bill, who's been in recovery for 20-something years. And he said, Michael, are you nervous? And I said, I'm a little nervous. And he goes, Michael, that is really good, because if you weren't nervous, that means you would be preparing to lie. And I said, oh, that's a good way to start it. And never heard that before. So I thought that'd be a good icebreaker, very good way to get started. And, my journey in the rooms of 12 steps started about 8 years ago. Like you said, I'm a licensed clinical therapist. I have my own private practice in Chicago. I specialize in working with men around depression and anxiety, addiction, and relationship issues. I've struggled with my own depression and anxiety and bipolar for the last probably 20, 25 years. And 8 years ago, my life started to fall apart. Now, like a lot of people, I've tried everything. I've done medication, therapy, seminars, retreats, workshops, you name it. Like most people, I've done everything. And it did work. It's not like it didn't work at all, but I would consider myself consistently having relapses into depression, into anxiety, into these manic stages, into these low depression. And when I turned 40, I woke up with a pain in my back. And I've only had this pain in my back one other time in my life. And it was a very distinct pain. And this pain ended my basketball career when I was 16 years old. And when I was younger, that was my life. Michael Jordan, being from Chicago, Michael Jordan was my hero. I wore number 23, thought I was Michael Jordan. My plan was to be an NBA superstar until 16. Just hurt my back. I don't know. I played basketball all the time. And one day I hurt my back. I don't know what happened. Just woke up and it started hurting. And I don't remember hurting it. And I couldn't tie my shoes. I couldn't bend over. I could barely walk. Went for a ridiculous amount of doctor's appointments and MRIs, and nobody found anything. Now, I wasn't lying, obviously. I wanted to continue playing basketball, but I hurt my back, and that was the end of my basketball career. And I really thought in my life, I'm screwed. I didn't date women. I didn't have a social life. That was just who I was. And I think that's when my depression started kicking in. And I think that led to me to be a psychotherapist years later, because as a teenage boy, I didn't know who to talk to, and I didn't know what to do with these feelings. Now, when I woke up that one morning at age 40, that pain was there. And my marriage was falling apart. It was crumbling. I was married for 15 years at the time, 14, 15 years. My children were 9 and 6 at the time. And I wear a bracelet here, and it says survivor. And I consider myself a survivor of divorce. And some people, when I say that, they joke around, and I'm not joking around about it, because AA saved my life. I want to tell you a little about how I got into AA, and just really quick about saying a survivor. It's a staggering statistic that it's hard for me to believe, but I understand that for quite some time, the highest rate of suicide in the nation is middle to upper middle class Caucasian men who are either single or widowed, divorced or widowed. And it makes sense to me. So I survived it, and I'm grateful every day for that. And when I could realize I'm living at bonus time, it allows me to live life in a lot more freer and better place. So when my life was falling apart at that time, and my wife asked for a divorce, I really went into a bad place. And, just imagine that somebody, myself, struggling with depression, anxiety, and bipolar, working and specializing with that population. And for the millionth time, put a Google search. That's how desperate I was. In a Google search, I put treatment for depression, right? And by the grace of God, the first article that popped up was treating depression as an addiction. Never heard of that before. I read the article, and it talked about the 12 steps. Now, the only thing I knew about the 12 steps as a medical professional, the only thing I knew, they didn't teach us this in school. And unless you're an addict, I don't think you get exposed to the 12 steps. The only thing I knew about the 12 steps was there's a step about making amends. That's all I knew about it. But I read this article, and it talked about the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I never heard of at that point. So I went to the library, and I got the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this article is said to read page 1 through 164. So I did that. And everywhere it said the word alcohol, I just replaced it with the word depression. And I read this book, and I was reading this book. They talk about meetings, and going to fellowship was important. And I said, well, I probably would have went to like an Emotional Anonymous or Coda. I didn't really know anything about them at the time, but they weren't really around me. And I saw there was a local AA meeting that was a mile from my house at this local church. And I went in, and it was a 7 a.m. meeting on a Tuesday morning. And I just went in bawling, crying, and told him my story. I said, listen, I'm not an alcoholic. I drink a little, but not really. And can I sit with you guys? I'm desperate. I struggle with depression, and here's what's going on with me. And they looked around. There's like 10 guys and a couple of women at the meeting, and they probably never had somebody like me do that. And I said, they looked around. They said, sure. I'm pretty sure if they would have said no, there might have been a good chance I wouldn't be here today. So we talk about closed meetings of AA or closed fellowships. I'm a big believer that all meetings should be open. And I do understand singleness of purpose. But at the same time, if they would have said no, like I said, AA saved my life. And a lot of people have given me some hard times over the years saying, you're not an alcoholic. And I go to AA meetings all the time. And they say, well, you're not an alcoholic. This is for people who have serious alcohol problems, who are addicts. and singleness of purpose. And, you kind of come here and this saved our life. We are recovering alcoholics. I said, yeah, I get it. It saved my life too. And so I started going to this meeting every Tuesday morning and Thursday morning, every week for week in, week out, week in, week out. And these guys became my friends. I lost a friend, Cole. I knew him for a year. He died, not of alcohol, but he just woke up one morning, he died, and just went to his funeral and bonded with these men and started going out for breakfast with them after every meeting. And one day a man said to me, he said, Michael, do you realize you're smiling? And I said, no. He goes, you're smiling and you joke and you laugh. And for me, that's a spiritual experience or a spiritual awakening, because I wasn't sure if I started smiling that day or a week ago or a month ago. And that's my experience of spiritual experiences, is that there is a shift within me that I can't recognize until maybe somebody points it out. And then I don't know when it happened. So that's a little about my background with AA. I then found a fellowship called Misery Addicts Anonymous. Never heard of it. And most people have never heard of it, but I went away for treatment, and I'll talk about it in a little while. And I saw the book finally in the bookstore for the first time. It's a book called When Misery is Company by Anne Catherine. And there's a lady, Shirley, who is one of my inspirations. She read the book, and I think Anne Catherine might have been her therapist. And she started these Misery Addicts Anonymous or Self-Sabotage Anonymous meetings. Now, most people never heard of this fellowship, and it's probably only maybe a couple hundred people in this fellowship, the phone-based fellowship. And she inspired me. She told a story that she did a Thursday evening meeting. And for 2 years, she was the only person that attended the meeting. And she would get on the meeting and she would do the typical meeting, like how it works. She would read the promises. She would read the 12 steps. She said, would anybody like to share? And she would go, my name's Shirley. I'm a misery addict. I'd like to share. And for 2 years, she did that. And finally, one day, somebody showed up. And then another person showed up. And years later, I found the program, probably 2 or 3 years, the program was already in existence. And I started going, I started being of service and leading it. And through myself and other people, we grew the fellowship. And when I left, I stopped going a couple of years ago, kind of moved more into Dakota, but I'll talk about that in a little. We had over 100 people on our mailing list, and we had meetings every single day of the week, which was an inspiration for me in starting meetings. Recently, I started a meeting, a men's two-way prayer meeting. It takes place every single day, Monday through Sunday, 7 days a week. And I started it about almost 2 months ago. And I always think of her because sometimes the two-way prayer meeting is just me and God, and we have a great meeting. In other meetings, there's 1 or 2, and sometimes 10 men show up, and it just doesn't matter because it's the perfect people who show up. And I've met people from all around the world, from Bali, from Haiti, from Zimbabwe. And one of the things I love about COVID is that I've had the opportunity to meet people and be part of the Toronto Fellowship, Spiritual Gangsters. I know you have a lot of people who talk from here, and I've been able to speak at a Zimbabwe meeting 2 or 3 times. I don't even know where Zimbabwe was on a map. I mean, I had to look for it. So let me tell you a little more about my story. So I went to AA. I started recovering AA, started Misery Addicts Anonymous and went in that. And then, did that for a while and got through my divorce and was single for a while and then dated a few times over at the time. And we got into some relationships. And before I go there, let me talk about emotional sobriety, because that's my topic. So I probably should spend some time talking about emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety is not talked a lot about in 12-step rooms because it really doesn't talk about emotional sobriety in the big book. So people who are big book meeting, kind of big book thumpers, which I am, I love the big book. It does. I think emotional sobriety is talked a lot more in the 12 and 12. And the person I really am inspired is Dr. Alan Berger. He wrote several books on emotional sobriety, published by Hazelden. He speaks at Hazelden. Somebody I've met a few times, and really he's the expert at emotional sobriety. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but there was a letter that Bill Wilson wrote in 51 to the Grapevine. It was called The New Frontier. And it talks about Emotional Sobriety. And it talks about how Bill was sober for 20 something years and then was struck by depression, and how even though he was sober, he wasn't sober emotionally. Right. And that letter is really important to me because it's the first time I really saw depression be talked about as an addiction. And I haven't met many people like me, probably none, who went to AA or even used the 12 steps for their depression. Now, I love the spiritual gangsters because they talk about, wherever you see alcohol in a big book, just replace it with sex and love addiction. Just replace it with codependency. Just replace it with any addictive behavior. Now, I'm going to throw out a couple controversial points in this that I know a lot of people who are listening won't agree with, especially people in recovery and true addicts. But I want to throw out a few things. The first thing I want to throw out that I think is controversial is I think we are all addicts. Now, some more severe than others, but we all have vices that we go to suppress and numb those feelings. I think we're all addicted to the same thing. And the addiction truly is, we're addicted to anger, sadness, fear, guilt, and shame. That we can't sit with those feelings. I don't know how to sit with those feelings. So I go for a solution, right? We talk about alcohol is not the addiction, it's the solution to the addiction. And because I can't deal with those feelings, guess what I do? I have unhealthy sex. I have unhealthy relationships. I eat, I gamble, I drink, I use drugs. Now, other people, they exercise, they binge watch on Netflix. They're addicted to electronics, whatever it is. We all have our vice we go to. And I know people don't think that. I think they think, they have this idea, if you don't qualify, then you're not one of us. Now, I think there's different levels. Just like people say, are you autistic? Are you ADHD? Are you, schizophrenic? Or are you depressed? I think it all falls on a spectrum. And so I treat all my clients like they're addicts. I really do. And I realize, for me, the main difference between 12 steps and therapy or anything else I ever tried was steps 1, 2, and 3. For me, steps 4 through 10 aren't new. They're not really that new. 1, 2, and 3, and I guess 6 and 7 are new to me. But when I heard you're powerless over depression, I'm powerless over depression, that just hit me so hard. Finally, somebody gets it. I never heard that before. My life was unmanageable. And then 2 came to believe that a power greater than me could restore me to sanity. Like, what the hell was that? Like, I didn't have a relationship with God. I'm Jewish, raised Jewish, but I believe in God, but not in an everyday type of basis. And my first sponsor told me to get on your hands and knees and start praying. But pray for what? I didn't know. Hands and knees, that seemed ridiculous. But he had something I wanted. And so I was willing to go to any lengths to do that. And I just said the Serenity Prayer because it's the only prayer I knew. And now I have a huge stack of prayers that I use, and they didn't happen overnight. And I pray often, and I sit in silence often, because that's the way I get in touch with God. In Judaism, there's 3 ways to get in touch with God. I didn't realize. I was meeting with my rabbi, and he's a retired rabbi, and we play golf together every once in a while. And we're going to write a book together, because when we leave the 4th green and we go to the 5th tee, he turns to me and goes, Michael, okay, I'm ready for the question. And I always have a different spiritual question to ask him. And he told me we get in touch with God in 3 ways in Judaism. He said you could do it through scripture, you could do it through prayer and meditation, or you could do it from acts of love and kindness, random acts of kindness. And he said he finds it through scripture. Now, I don't. I have nothing wrong with the New Testament, Old Testament. It just doesn't resonate with me. I read the big book too, and it helps me intellectually. It helps me in my mind. I always thought Judaism is a very intellectual religion. I love it. And we always debate, and it's very intellectual. And I'm very intellectual. Like, I need to cut my head off sometimes, because spirituality for me happens from the neck down. And in prayer and meditation, that's where I get my connection with God. And it's just amazing to me that, I can meditate now for 45 minutes to an hour and just sit there and allow my thoughts to pass. And at the beginning, 30 seconds was an eternity. And so I'll talk about meditation maybe later. So emotional sobriety, let me go back to emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety, my definition is being able to keep my peace, my serenity, and my fulfillment without having it depend on things outside of me. So again, another way to say it is I can have my peace and serenity and fulfillment, and whatever happens outside of me in the external world doesn't affect my peace and serenity. Now, I remember saying this to clients, and they're like, Michael, that I'm not going to swear on this. I'm going to try not to swear on this podcast, but they said, that's freaking impossible, Michael. How do you do that? So if my wife is angry at me, or there's, people in the world who are unvaccinated or vaccinated, or I don't like the politics that are going on, or the person in front of me is driving horribly, you saying you could keep your peace and serenity? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, I want that. How do you get that? And I said, well, guess what? You got to develop what I call a spiritual muscle. It just doesn't happen. It's like I call it, I got to go to my spiritual gym. So just like you go to your gym to lift weights, you could bench press, anybody could bench press 300 pounds. You could, but not in your first day, and not in your first week, and not in your first month. So I say that's the same thing with, I got my spiritual toolbox. And in my spiritual toolbox, I have a lot of tools. I got prayer. I got meditation. I got acts of kindness. I have service to others. I go to meetings. I sponsor people. I read spiritual material. I take spiritual walks. Like, I have a whole bunch of spiritual tools. And and most people who come into recovery, they don't have a toolbox. And if they do have a toolbox, they have a hammer and maybe a screwdriver, and that's it. Right. So I work out my spiritual muscle really hard. I heard as a podcast or something about Will Smith, and he said, I might not be the best looking guy and might not be the most talented actor out there, but I'll work harder than anybody out there. He goes, if I'm in a treadmill and you're in a treadmill, I will not get off first. I'll work harder. And I challenge anybody. I've met a few people in recovery that work their program as hard as I do, but I take great pride in my spiritual program because I know if I don't do it, I know where it leads to. Look, like I got a little over 5 minutes left here. I want to touch on a couple other topics really quickly to give you a little more background about me. Last June 22nd to August 5th, I went to Pia Melody's retreat center. I call it retreat center, but it's really a residential facility. I went there for the Hurt Love Addiction program. And now, if you've never read any Pia Melody's work, Love Addiction, Love Avoidance, great material. She's been around for 40 years. People think she's Melody Beattie, but she's not Melody Beattie. Melody Beattie wrote Codependence No More, I think it's called. And Pia Melody has been around for 40 years. And she has a retreat center in Wickenburg, Arizona. It's a residential facility. I would live there if I could bring all my friends and family there. It was intense, but I went there for 45 days. I was there for 45 days, and people say to me, how do you do that, Michael? You had a career, you have a life, you have at that time, my kids were a little older. Well, you make it happen. And I needed to, because I was in a bad place. I didn't hit my rock bottom, but I saw some of the behaviors. I was reaching out to women. I was having some inappropriate conversations with women, and I saw where I was going. And I'm one of the grateful people that I'm able to change somehow without hitting my rock bottom. And I'm grateful for that, because most people can't. One of the biggest things I study and people want to know is, how do you change without hitting your rock bottom? Right? This is another controversial point. We talk in the rooms about we're trying to raise the ceiling. I don't think it works. I've never seen anybody who has changed without hitting rock bottom, truly changed. And it's one of the challenges I have as a psychotherapist, because the people who come to see me in the Southwest, fairly affluent suburb, they come to me, they want to change. They have a desire to change. There's some parts of their life that aren't working too well. But there's a big difference between I need to change, I'm desperate to change, versus I have a desire or I want to change. And if you desire or want to change, unfortunately, it's hard to change. So I went to this program. I read this book right here, Changed My Life. Can you see that? Silently Seduced. Changed my life. I read it, highlighted, bookmarked, and it just talks about something called covert incest. Covert incest. I always have a problem with that word. And I always thought for years I was sexually abused, because the symptoms I have and the things I struggle with in life, it just seems like it was really parallel to people who got sexually abused. And I read this book, and there's something called covert incest that I never heard of before. And what it is when you have an enmeshment. In this case, my enmeshment was with my mother. And I always believed that I had this amazing mother. And I do. I'm not here to bad rap my mom. She's amazing. But I always believed that she always looked out for me first. She was looking out for my emotional needs, my health, my safety, my fulfillment. And after this reading this book, I realized that wasn't the truth. That mom used me as a surrogate husband, that dad wasn't around a lot. So I was the person who provided emotional support with her. I provided her these things. I watched movies with her. I watched shows with her. I would go shopping with her. And I liked these movies and I liked these shows and I liked going shopping. But I realized it was more for her than for me. And those are things that she should have been doing with my dad. And as I read this, and they talk about the side effect from that and how messed up that is and how that causes a young boy to really get these messages mixed up, it could be as severe as sexual abuse they talk about. Some people think it's worse. And here's what my sex and love addiction and codependence started with mom, is that mom, as a 7-year-old boy, I didn't realize these things. As an adult, I could see it now. But she would say things like, Michael, you look really hungry. You look really hungry today. You should have something to eat. You look hungry. And I would think, I don't feel too hungry. But if mom says I'm hungry, I'm probably hungry. So mom was hungry. So she assumed I was hungry. Other things like I would come home and it would be a busy day. And she goes, Michael, you look really tired. Aren't you tired? I don't think so. But maybe if mom thinks I am, I am. And I started to lose myself. I didn't, we hear the term gaslighting, the idea of that I can't trust myself anymore, that other people, especially women, know more than I do. And as you could imagine, my history with women, that they became my gods. And in the last 8 years, being in Sex and Love Addictions Anonymous and in CODA has helped me realize that I just have one God, and it's not women. And I would need women in my life, and I need men in my life, and need people in my life, but they're not my gods. All right, I'm going to end with this, the two most controversial points I have. I know people aren't going to agree with this. I have a podcast. I started a podcast myself about 1.5 years ago. It's called My Blueprint: Struggle Toward Emotional Sobriety. And being an addict I am selfish to the extreme. So it's 273 episodes. They're all about 8 to 15 minutes long. No guests. I don't talk about anything other than myself, just me, for 273 episodes. And it's not for other people. I started it as an online journal, and a couple clients liked it. And I have 32,000 downloads now. I'm pretty excited about 32,000 downloads. And I had 3 listeners. It was me, my mom, and one of my clients, John, at the beginning. And I did it for me. It's not for other people. It's an online journal. It's for me. And it's for me to speak my truth and speak vulnerably. And if other people get value, great. But it's really to remind myself of what I know, but I'm not practicing on a day-to-day basis. All right, 2 controversial points. Sex and Love Addictions Anonymous. First of all, I think it should not be a co-ed fellowship. I think it's what I was taught when I was at the Meadows. We went to 44 different AA meetings every single night. And we had a choice from CODA or AA or NA or SLA, but we didn't call it SLA. We called it SLAW or SLAM. So sex and love addiction for women or sex and love addiction for men. And I'm a big believer it should not be co-ed. And I know there's people in Spiritual Gangsters that are listening like, no, you're a child of God and you got to be able to serve everybody. No, I don't think we should sponsor other genders either. I've tried it. I don't think it works. I know people say it does. It's controversial, right? And I think for me, even though I'm in recovery, I just think, especially with Zoom, I'm scrolling through the pictures, I'm looking who's there. And I notice I'm different with women than men. And I'm on some CODA men's groups, and there's something different if you're and there's CODA women's groups. There's something different if you're in a gender same group. So that's my controversial point. And then my last one, or one more I'll do. Maybe I got 3. SLA. I think it's a great fellowship, and I'm very active in it, going to continue being active. But most people, I haven't met anybody actually in a year and a half that have this criteria. Most people in SLA are either married or in a committed relationship, and they use this program to enhance their relationship, right? There's very few, if any, are out there dating, and there's very few, any, that are out there that I found are in a healthy relationship. So they came single, and now they're in a healthy relationship. And we have these thing called sexual anorexics. And I saw myself going down that direction. But I want a relationship. I really do. And I'm still searching. So any listeners out there, if you want to connect with me, I'd love to talk about this topic, right? All right, final thing, and I'll wrap up here. I think I'm pretty close to the bottom of the hour, so I'll wrap up after this one. Moderation. Here we go. You ready? Moderation is possible in recovery, right? That is a word we don't use in recovery, moderation, most times. My rabbi, somebody I'm really close with, she's in recovery. This is public. She's not breaking confidentiality. She's been a recovering alcoholic for 25 years and become a good friend of mine. I called her the other day and I said, I want to talk about moderation. She goes, well, that's a tough term because that's not a term in my vocabulary. As an alcoholic, I cannot do moderation. But in Judaism, it's a term we use frequently. And she goes, that's a tough one. But she said, you've asked me a lot of questions, Michael, over the years. You stumped me here because as an addict, I don't know moderation. And I said, well, I wish I was an alcoholic or a drug addict or a gambler. And now, of course, I don't wish I was, but in a way I wish I was because it's easy. You just don't do it. And your life could be fine without gambling or without drinking or without doing drugs. But if the two toughest fellowships for me by far are OA, Overeaters Anonymous, and Sex and Love Addictions Anonymous, because you can't not eat, right? You got to find some moderation. And my challenge right now, and I'll be honest and be vulnerable here, that I'm starting to date and I want to be in a relationship. And I think I'm at a healthy place where I can be in a healthy relationship. But how do I do that and work my SLAA program? How do I balance that fine line between not reaching out to a qualifier, not having unhealthy relationships with women? And it's very easy for me to do that. Just don't do it at all. If I could be really sober by not doing it at all. But to me, that's not really sobriety. I want to be living. I want a committed partner. I want a person who is recovered and is working their program, whatever their program is in life. And I want to have a romantic relationship. And it's something that is often not talked about in SLAA. All right, my throat is starting to hurt a little here, Justin. So that's a sign for me to stop. And hope you guys got something out of this.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for that. We're going to do some Q&A here. So if you want to get a drink in the meantime, but before that, one quick question that came in. What is the name again of your podcast?
I'll give you a link to it. It's called My Blueprint, Struggle Towards Emotional Sobriety. If you post that on your sites,
yep, I'll put it on. I'll put it in the show notes.
I'll give you it really quick. It's MLSLCSW.
Yeah. So what I'll have you do is I'll have you email that to me and I'll put it in the show notes.
Perfect. Okay, good.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Michael. We've got a few questions that have come in already, and I've written down several. And a reminder to our live audience here: if you want to ask a question of Michael, type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Let's jump right into the next question. An anonymous attendee, and this goes on one of the controversial things you said towards the end. It looks like so. This anonymous attendee asks, separating genders may work with cis straight, but what about LGBTQA and community with that?
Good question. I don't have an answer. I don't. I mean, I have to think about that I don't know how that works necessarily, but maybe there's a separate call. And I know there's in Spiritual Gangsters, they have BIPOC meetings and they have some other different types of meetings. So maybe this is more just for heterosexual men or women, that gender neutral meetings. But good question. I'll have to think about that one.
Yeah.
One thing I'm trying to learn, and it's something I really want to see more in politics and I want to see in the world, is for people to say, I don't know, instead of giving some BS answer. Like, I don't know. Good question. If anybody knows or you want to talk about it, I'd love to. I just don't know. Good question.
Yeah, I love that. And then when I answer that question with I don't know, I can then say, but I'm going to go think about this. I'm going to go research.
Yeah.
I'm going to go figure it out and come back. And then maybe I'll have it figured out, but maybe it's one of those questions that I may never know and have to walk by, what they say, walk by faith with that.
Yeah.
Anyways, good question. And another answer. I don't know.
You have an answer for that one, Justin? Well, what's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are, I think, very similar to yours. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I think that, like you said, there are many meetings that I've found out there that are, targeted towards the LGBTQA community. And I think those might be good situations for those, good locations for those. All right. I have a question for you that was brought up, that came up as you were sharing. And this is something that that really I struggle with a lot. You talked about the three ways of connecting with God in Judaism, and one of those being prayer and meditation. And you talked about being so intellectual that sometimes you have to basically, figuratively cut off your own head in order to get into a state where you can connect spiritually with your higher power. How do you go about figuratively cutting off your head and doing that?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I do a lot of, and they really enforce this at the Meadows when I went away, is more of somatic type of therapy. And somatic therapy is more getting in touch with your body. I'll put a little plug in for a good friend of mine, Greg Gitz, who is a myofascial release therapist, MFR. One of the most painful therapies I've ever done, but one of the most productive of really helping you get into the body and pushing into different muscles and releasing the fascia of the muscle. And it's painful, but it's a release. So acupuncture, I do flotation. I don't know if you ever heard of flotation, sensory deprivation tanks. I've been doing that for 20 years, right? Lay and float and acupuncture, massage, meditation to me is a part of it too. It's a way for me to just, because here's the thing, I was always taught, I don't know about you, Justin, and the listeners, you just work hard and you become really smart and you go to school and you get a higher degree, and the smarter the better, right? But that doesn't work for recovery, right? So this idea of trying different things to get out of my head. I love reading. That's why I don't like Bible studies that much. It's too intellectual for me. I love doing it, but it doesn't help me get in touch with God the way I need to. So, I'm always open for new ways of how do you get into your body and below your neck, because that's where spirit and God doesn't come through my head. Never does. It comes through below my head. Good question.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Early on in the talk that you gave, you talked about your relationship with depression and how finding that link on Google about treating depression as an addiction really opened your eyes to a whole new thing. You, as a practicing psychotherapist, are there other situations of the hopeless variety that you, and I think you talked about this a little bit later on in the talk, but let's go specifically. So situations of the hopeless variety that you say, hey, maybe a 12-step program would work for you.
Yeah. I don't know if this answers your question. I feel like a politician here. I've always, how often you watch debates and you have a question and then the politician says an answer and it has nothing to do with the question. So I hope this isn't that, but here's a hopeless variety. In 20 years as a practitioner, dealing mostly with men and done a lot of marriage counseling, now I'm not saying this is true out in the world, but in my experience as a practitioner, I've only met one man who has asked for a divorce from his wife. So men don't ask for divorces. And if you talk to men and women who are divorced and you ask who initiated it, almost, in my experience, 99.9% it's been women. Now, why is that? I have some philosophies around that, but that's a hopeless variety. In my case, one man out of 20 years who asked for a divorce. And a lot of men stay in the relationship and they know their wife is never going to ask for a divorce. I'm no different. If my wife didn't ask for a divorce, I would still be in my marriage and still be miserable. And it's another topic of why I think that is. A bigger way to ask that question, a hopeless variety is almost every single person I see in my therapy office. Now that's pretty sad, right? The hopeless of variety are people who don't hit the rock bottom. They're hopeless. They might tweak a little, they might alter themselves a little, but I don't think, and this is something that I wish I could change this, but I've studied this hard for myself and with people over the last 20 years. I think it's very difficult to near impossible to change if you don't hit your rock bottom. And I've heard clients and people I sponsor have said this a lot to me over the years. Well, I want to hit my rock bottom. Yeah, I said, yeah, but you're not at your rock bottom. But I want to. Well, I say, well, here's some ways. Leave that marriage that you're unhappy with, right? Leave that job you're unhappy with. I think that will get you closer to your rock bottom. Yeah, but I don't want to do that. But I want to hit my rock bottom. And it's a tough, and we all seem like, you've ever met somebody, maybe you have. I've been to a lot of rooms over the years. I've never met anybody who comes into a 12-step room, any room, and says, you know what, I'm kind of suffering a little, right? And I'm just taking some precautionary steps. So I thought I would come to this 12-step meeting to check out to see if this might be something that might work for me. No, every single person I ever met was at their rock bottom, was desperate. If this didn't work, they're screwed. I just haven't. Again, this is, my personal experience. I'm sure there's other people who went in rooms, but every single person, including myself, that went to a room, this is my last ditch effort. I don't want to go there. So yeah, kind of answer your question, not really, but unfortunately, the hopeless variety who really want to change are the ones who haven't hit their rock bottom.
Yeah, and I have some thoughts about that too, but I think, and you said this was one of the controversial things that you brought up is, can't really bring our bottoms up. And I may be someone on the other side of that, because I feel my rock bottom was, and everybody has a different rock bottom, but my rock bottom was totally different than so many others that I've met. And some it was higher than, others it was lower than, but I've seen people with different levels of rock bottom. And that's something that I bring, I have comfort in, that, not everybody has to, crash and burn to find the hope that is there after the hopelessness.
Let me share it a little different way. Let me share it a little different way, Justin. Okay. I agree with what you said. What I mean is when a newcomer comes into the room and we share kind of our war stories, we share where we were, and we hope that if we share it in a certain way, that will help the newcomer not have to go to their rock bottom. That I think that's the kind of raising that bottom for that person. I don't think that's too effective. I think it's good we do it, but I think that person needs to experience what they need to experience. So yeah, but I hear what you're saying, that we all have our own rock bottoms.
I got you. That and I understand what you're saying there. Good. Thank you for sharing that and clarifying that. All right, we've got another question that came in from our audience. An anonymous attendee says, "Love that about not finding God in your head. Any thoughts on people struggling with this and a quick way to stop?"
Other than chop your head off, right?
Yeah, basically. We don't want to do that, right? Than literally chop your head off. Yeah.
That's another good question. I say, again, my experience and what my first sponsor said, and some people don't like this again, fake it until you make it. Get down on your hands and knees and pray and keep asking. My spiritual practice is as many times as I can during the day, God, what's the next action I should take? And when I ask that question, it doesn't come from my head. I don't know where it comes from, but it's, Michael, call Bill. You haven't talked to Bill for a while. I think you should go over there and donate some stuff to Goodwill. Where does that stuff come from, right? Now, I think men have as strong as intuition as women, right? You hear women's intuition. I think what women do better than men is women trust their intuition. They just feel it and they just take action. They don't question it. As men, we feel it and then we kind of go up into our head. We intellectualize to try to figure out, and that seems like a stupid idea of, I don't have time. That's not a good idea to go to Goodwill. Just go. So I think it's a muscle we have to develop. Where as men, I think most men are intellectual. I don't know if it comes from a man or a woman, but I think as men, it's what I specialize in and it's who I am. So I can only speak for myself. Is I have to practice through prayer, through meditation, through a variety of other spiritual tools to get out of my head. And yeah, if anyone wants to talk offline about that, that's one of my favorite topics that I try hard every day, because my head does not help me. My intellect doesn't help me in my recovery. And we often talk about in the big book, we talk about the intellectual type, right? Those people struggle to recover. And I was definitely one of those. And I heard 3 people struggle in recovery. The 3 hardest, somebody told me this, don't know if it's true, but it makes sense to me. People who have money struggle with recovery. The really, really smart people, intellectual struggle. And this one surprised me, but I believe it. Clergy. Because they have their concept of God, they believe in God, they have a tough time surrendering to maybe this different type of God we talk about in our program.
I really believe what you just shared there, especially so my sponsor, one time when I was trying to intellectualize my way through one of the steps, I can't remember which step, he goes, Justin, I have rarely met someone too stupid for recovery.
I love that.
But I've met a lot of people who are too smart for recovery, and you're trying to be too smart. And he said it, you're trying to be, as if you're not really too smart, Justin. You're not as smart as you think you are. But it was a really good, humbling thing and a good insight for me. And the other part with the clergy, and I think it goes along with somebody who, like myself, was raised pretty orthodox in my faith. I thought I knew who God was. I thought I knew what all these things were. And until I had an Orthodox Jew who is not of my faith introduce me to the concept of firing the old God and hiring a new God. And the old God is a small g God, and the new God is a capital G God. Until I grabbed hold of that concept, I was stuck. Yeah, I was sober, but I was stuck. I just didn't trust a higher power to take me along. So thank you for talking about those things and bringing those back up. Let's see. Before we move on here, I think that I'd like to ask you, do you have any final words of wisdom you'd like to share? Actually, before that, Michael, are you okay if you said that you'd be willing to talk with somebody offline? So what I'll do is anybody offline who wants to talk with Michael about any of these things, email me at RECO12pod, RECO12pod @gmail.com, and I can connect you with Michael directly that way. So Michael, do you have any final words of wisdom before we wrap up here?
Final words of wisdom. Well, I think the biggest thing for me, and I said this to a client that I was talking to before this call, is, there's a word that I heard a couple of years ago, which I really like, which is egocide, which is different than suicide. And I think what we need as recovery addicts is to kill that ego, not to kill ourselves, right? So one of my prayers is, and I hope today, and I tried that, it's really easy for me to speak and only speak and be focused on me, and hope you guys think I'm so great and you're so smart and so eloquent and you have such great things. But really, I hope you got value. And hopefully this was a way to share myself in a way that whoever's listening gets value. And I think, for me, probably the biggest piece of my recovery has come since January. I've really taken on, since January, sponsoring as many people as I can. And there's some statistic out there that, people who just go to meetings, certain percentage recover. And people who go to meetings and work the steps, there's a certain amount of recovery. But if you go to meetings and you work the steps and then you sponsor, it's like 75% or higher. Like, it's a high percentage that stay recovered. So for me, being of service today, and I guess I'll share this last story because people who know me know this about me. One of the things I love to do, and I started doing about 8 years, is pick garbage up. And I get excited when there's garbage on the ground. And I think that's God putting that right there for me. And I pick it up, and that's God saying, thank you, God. The more disgusting, the bigger the gift. And I like cleaning little bathrooms up and doing things like that. And a lot of my clients will joke around because they start doing it now. And one of my least favorite places in the world, from one perspective, is Disney World or Disneyland, because there's really no garbage to pick up. But I love Disneyland and Disney World. But no, I love picking garbage. So if you're thinking of like being of service, you don't have to go volunteer. Just go outside. There's garbage outside. There are weeds to be picked. And I have another story for weeds, but that's a great way for me to be of service. So I guess that's my closing thought of, when I get stuck, I turn to faith. And the acronym for faith for me, find another individual to help. When I'm lacking faith, I find another individual to help. And somehow I gain a closer relationship through God, through other people.
I love that final acronym on faith. I've never heard that one. I'm sure maybe it's one that is out there somewhere else. And one more quick question, kind of a joke here. Anna from our live audience says, please come to the Bronx. Lots of garbage here to pick up. So,
all right. Invite me.
That's quite I'm going to have to start thinking about that. Oftentimes I'll walk past a little piece of trash and not pick it up because not my problem. But I think that's a good thing to think about and recognize, hey, it is my problem. All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community there and ask those questions and other questions that will come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you have not yet gone to rico12.com and submitted your email address, you only need to do it once. Please get on the invitation list so that you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Next week, we'll be hearing from Cameron F., who is someone in the Toronto area also, but he was our second guest ever on RICO 12 over a year ago. And this time he's going to be talking to us about analyzing relapse, taking the steps from 12 to 1 to figure out where and why I relapsed and really digging in there. And I'm real excited about this one. I think it'll be good. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with a prayer that Michael will be giving. It's one of his that he talked about, a whole stack of prayers here. You ready to do that, Michael?
I am. Part of this prayer, my sponsor gave me, another one I kind of added on. So here's the prayer. Oh God, help me see the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful that is. Knowing that when I see the beauty in myself, I'm able to assist others to see the beauty within themselves. God, give me the courage, strength, and wisdom to see who I really am versus the lies, manipulations, and stories I make up about myself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. Everybody, keep coming back. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching